The year is 1527. On a rocky island in the Aegean Sea, a bell rings one final time. Inside the convent of St. Thecla, 17 women kneel in prayer. Their chant is a low, steady hum against the gathering storm. They are nuns, brides of Christ. Their world is one of ritual, quiet labor, and illuminated manuscripts, but that world ends today. Beyond the walls, the horizon bleeds crimson with the banners of the Ottoman fleet. They have come not to burn, but to inventory. Mother Superior. Helena clutches her rosary. She knows the stories from the fall of Constantinople decades before. She knows what Islamic law allows. But what she and history itself failed to grasp was this. What was about to happen wasn't a brutal exception. It was a calculated legal process. Welcome to the Black Code. The truth is a weapon. Tonight, we're walking into a courtroom of conquest. This isn't a story of random wartime rape. This is a story of jurisprudence, of holy books and legal precedents being used to dismantle a human soul, piece by piece, with terrifying precision. What Ottoman qadis, Islamic judges, did to captured nuns wasn't just violence, it was administration. And that makes it one of history's most chilling anomalies. To understand this, you have to erase the image of the barbarian horde. The Ottomans were a bureaucracy, a machine. And when their machine captured consecrated Christian women, its gears engaged with cool, legal efficiency. The door of the convent splinters, not with savage rage, but with the methodical force of soldiers acting under a firman, a royal decree. The legal conquest has begun. First, understand the battlefield, not the physical one, but the theological and legal one. In the Christian world, a nun was more than a woman. She was a sposa Christi, the bride of Christ. Her virginity was a spiritual covenant, a mystical marriage that placed her in a sacred category, untouchable by earthly men. In the Islamic world, particularly under Ottoman Sharia as interpreted by their courts, the landscape was different. The primary legal categories were Muslim, dhimmi, protected non-Muslim, and slave. A nun, especially one captured from a land at war with the Sultan, often fell into a complex grey zone between dhimmi and war captive, sabi. As a war captive, her fate was subject to specific laws. And here is where the horror gets procedural. According to prominent schools of Islamic law followed by the Ottomans, female war captives immediately became property. Their previous social status, queen, noblewoman, nun, was legally nullified. They were mamluk, owned. But for nuns, the Ottomans faced a unique propaganda and legal problem. To simply rape and enslave them was one thing, but to break them legally served a grander purpose. It was a theological conquest, proving the superiority of Islam not just by the sword, but by the law, by demonstrating that Christ could not protect his brides. So, let's follow the process. Let's walk Sister Theodora, a 25-year-old nun from our convent, through the system. Her nightmare has a flowchart. Phase 1, the legal stripping. Theodora is dragged not to a barracks, but before a qadi in a makeshift courtroom, often set up in a captured church. The judge doesn't leer, he consults, he is an administrator of souls. The first legal act is to dissolve her spiritual marriage. Under Ottoman law, a non-Muslim marriage has no standing for a captive. But a nun's marriage to Christ, it is considered invalid, a fiction. The qadi legally annuls it. With a stroke of the pen, Theodora is transformed from a bride of Christ into a single, pagan female slave. Her sacred identity is the first thing legally murdered. Phase 2, the conversion pressure. Now a slave, Theodora is presented with a choice: convert to Islam If she does, her situation changes dramatically. As a new Muslim woman, she cannot legally be kept as a concubine by a non-Muslim owner. But here's the catch. Her owner is now the Sultan, or his high official, who is Muslim. Her conversion might spare her from being given to a common soldier, but it often funneled her directly into the imperial harem, a different kind of prison with silk sheets. The pressure is immense, torture is rarely needed, the legal and social degradation is the weapon, but many nuns refused. Their faith was their last fortress. For those who refused, the law provided clear guidelines for their new status. They were jawari, being concubines. This is not a slang term. It is a legal category. Phase 3. The legalized violation. As a concubine under Ottoman law, the master had the right of possession. This included sexual access. This is the crucial, terrifying part. The rape of a nun was not a chaotic war crime in the Ottoman context. It was the lawful exercise of a property right. The qadi had sanctioned it by classifying her. The soldier or official who claimed her was simply using his property. The violence was bureaucratized. For Theodora, this legal reality was a deeper violation than any act of brutal passion. Her body was not just taken, it was reclassified. Her trauma was a receipt in a state ledger. But the Ottomans, masters of psychological warfare, didn't stop at the law. They weaponized the aftermath. This is where it becomes truly sinister. Phase 4. The aftermath as propaganda. If a nun concubine bore a child, that child was by law free and Muslim. He was a son of the master with full rights. This child could rise to be a governor, a general. Many Ottoman elites were born of such unions. The mother, however, gained a new status, walad, mother of the child. She could no longer be sold, and she was freed upon her master's death. This was the trap. The system offered a perverse path to security through her violation. Imagine the psychological torment for Theodora, to bear the child of her violator, to have that child be her ticket to eventual safety, to love a child who is the living evidence of her legal and spiritual destruction. The system deliberately blurred the lines between victim and participant, between horror and hope. It sought to break not just the body, but the narrative of martyrdom. A martyred nun is a powerful symbol for Christendom. A nun who becomes the mother of a prosperous Muslim pasha. That is a confusing, silencing story. This was the ultimate silencing mechanism. It turned victims into compliant pieces of the Ottoman machine, their very survival muting their testimony. Now let's zoom out from Theodora's individual horror to see the scale. This wasn't isolated. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, countless nuns vanished into this system, from convents in Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Hungary. The sack of Otranto in 1480 saw hundreds of Italian clerics and nuns slaughtered, but many more taken into this legal slavery. But the paper trail exists. In the Ottoman archives, we find terse, chilling entries. Lists. Item. From the monastery of Visoki Dechani, 12 female slaves, consecrated. The word consecrated is noted not with reverence, but as a descriptor of type like craftsman or farmhand. Their holiness was just another data point for the market. And in the Vatican archives, desperate letters from bishops beg for help, describing the fate of their nuns in coded, horrified language. Taken into the houses of the infidel, forced to apostatize. But let's be clear, this legal framework was not some Ottoman invention. It was built on centuries of Islamic jurisprudence regarding prisoners of war. The Ottomans were simply the most efficient and bureaucratic enforcers of it. They industrialized a process that had existed since the early caliphates. This forces us to confront an uncomfortable historical truth. One civilization's sacred martyr is another civilization's lawfully acquired asset. The horror lies in the disconnect between these two realities. For the nun, she is undergoing a world-ending sacrilege. For the qadi, it's Tuesday morning's docket. But what about resistance? Did any nuns fight back within this legal framework? Astonishingly, yes. There are fragments of stories where women used the system against itself. Some, upon capture, immediately declared conversion, but then, citing Islamic law's prohibition on enslaving Muslims, demanded to be married properly as free women. This was a high-risk legal gambit. It sometimes worked, elevating them to wife status. More often, it led to accusations of insincere conversion and harsher treatment. Others, knowing the law that a concubine who bore a child gained protection, sought pregnancy as a grim survival strategy. They weaponized their own fertility against a system designed to exploit it. The mind reels at these calculations. These were not passive victims, they were theologians of survival, navigating a hellscape of religious law with stunning courage. This system also created bizarre hybrid figures in history. Consider the case of a nun taken in a raid on Cyprus, who became the walad of a high-ranking janissary officer. Her son, raised Muslim and Ottoman, rose to power, and through his influence she quietly endowed a Christian church in a back alley of Istanbul, a tiny monument to her stolen world. She lived as a Muslim matron by day, and perhaps mourned as a Christian nun in the secret dark. Her life was a living paradox engineered by the state. Now, we must ask the corrosive question, why does this matter? Because this pattern, bureaucratized, legalized sexual violence, is not a relic. It is a blueprint. When we see modern conflicts where rape is not a byproduct of war, but a documented military tactic with its own operational guidelines, we are seeing the ghost of the Ottoman qadis. When we see systematic re-education or forced marriage camps where ideology provides a cover for mass violation, we are seeing a modern, less elegant version of the same machine. The Ottoman system was terrifying because it was cold, because it used law, the very tool meant to protect, as the instrument of subjugation. It removed individual rage and made the crime impersonal, systemic, and therefore infinitely repeatable and scalable. That is the hallmark of true state terror. It also forces us to re-examine history. For centuries, Western historians wrote of Ottoman atrocities. Eastern historians dismissed it as biased propaganda. The truth, as always, is in the cold, hard documents, the supply lists, the court registries, the legal manuals that dispassionately outline the fate of the consecrated female captive. This is not about painting an empire as uniquely evil. All empires are built on bones. This is about recognizing a specific, refined technology of control, a technology that targeted what a woman held most sacred, her faith, her vow, her autonomy, and used her own body as the battlefield to defeat it, all under the color of law. So what became of Sister Theodora from St. Thecla's? History doesn't record her name. She dissolves into the statistics. Perhaps she died of despair in a slave barracks. Perhaps she became the mother of a minor official, living a long life of quiet internal exile. We will never know. But her story, and the story of thousands like her, is the shadow history of the Mediterranean world. It's the whisper behind the grand narratives of sultans and empires. It is the story of how law can be perverted into a weapon more devastating than any scimitar. A weapon that doesn't just kill the body, but annexes the soul. But let's go deeper. To understand the full chill of this system, we need to look at its supporting architecture, the slave market. After their legal reclassification, many nuns were not kept by their initial captors. They were sold. And here, their unique attributes were marketed. In the bustling slave markets of Istanbul, Cairo, or Algiers, a consecrated virgin commanded a higher price, not despite her vows, but because of them. She was advertised as untainted, disciplined, and literate, often able to read and write Greek or Latin. She was a luxury item for the elite. The auction block was the final stage of her legal undoing. Here, she was appraised by merchants who cared nothing for her god, only for her teeth, her hands, her age. The market transformed a spiritual crime into an economic transaction. The sin was commodified, the sacrament sold by the pound. And what of the families left behind? Brothers, fathers, former suitors, they were often powerless. Under the Ottoman millet system, the church could petition for its people. But for a nun in a harem, redemption was almost impossible. Ransoming a slave was common, but ransoming a concubine, especially one who had borne a child, was a diplomatic nightmare. The system was designed to absorb and digest these women, leaving no loose ends for Christendom to pull on. They vanished into the empire's bloodstream. Now consider the broader theological warfare. The Ottomans were brilliant at symbolic conquest. Converting the Hagia Sophia was the grand gesture. But converting, or rather consuming, the brides of Christ was the intimate, personal counterpart. It was a message sent directly to the Christian subconscious. Your God is powerless. He cannot save his house. He cannot save his wives. Every nun in a harem was a walking, breathing refutation of Christian divine power. This psychological campaign had a devastating effect on Christian morale in border regions. Why send your daughter to a convent if it just makes her a target for a fate worse than death? Vocation dried up. Monasteries in vulnerable areas were abandoned. The Ottomans, through this legalized practice, didn't just capture individuals, they attacked institutions at their core. But let's also look at the cracks in the Ottoman facade. This system, for all its cold efficiency, created internal tensions. Some Islamic scholars, even within the Ottoman sphere, expressed discomfort. Was it truly pious to force a woman of dedicated faith into concubinage? Debates simmered in theological circles. Some argued for their immediate release or exchange, but the state's political and economic interests always won. The harem system was a pillar of Ottoman power. It created alliances, produced heirs, and demonstrated the Sultan's boundless dominion. Nuns were premium fuel for this machine. Furthermore, the children of these unions, the devshirme of the bedroom, created a loyal elite with divided souls, bound to the state but born of a violated sacredness. It was a dangerous game. You might breed a loyal pasha, or you might breed a man with a subconscious rage against the system that created him from such a wound. Now let's fast forward. What is the legacy of this? You won't find it in standard textbooks, but you find it in genetics, in family secrets across the Balkans and Anatolia. You find it in the persistent, haunting folk songs of Greek and Serbian women lamenting the lost sisters who were taken to the lands of the crescent moon. You find it in the suspicious gaze some Orthodox communities still cast upon converts or returnees, the ghost of the fear of forced apostasy living for centuries. And you find it, most chillingly, in the modern legal philosophies of extremist groups who dust off these ancient legal precedents to justify the same acts today. The manual is still on the shelf. It just needed translation. When a modern militant cites centuries-old jurisprudence to take women as spoils of war, he is channeling the Ottoman qadi. This is the long shadow of legalized horror. It doesn't fade, it waits. It provides a template, a permission structure dressed in scholarly tradition for evil. So, what do we do with this knowledge? First, we must name it accurately. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't just war. It was a legal process of desecration. Second, we must challenge the romanticized view of history that paints empires in broad, heroic strokes. The devil is in the details and in the court documents. Finally, we must be vigilant for the reactivation of this code. When law is twisted to serve oppression rather than justice, the ghost of this system stirs. The story of the captured nun is the ultimate case study in how power, when married to scripture and bureaucracy, can commit atrocities with a clear conscience. It shows us that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who hates you, but the one who processes you, who sees your deepest beliefs as a clerical error to be corrected. Sister Theodora's final prayer was likely not for rescue but for oblivion, but history has denied her even that. Her story must be remembered. Not as a tale of victimhood, but as a stark warning, a warning about the infinite creativity of human cruelty when it puts on a judge's robe and reaches for a law book. This is the Black Code. We decipher the programs of power, and this was one of the most sinister programs ever written. It reminds us that the line between civilization and barbarism isn't drawn on a map, it's drawn in the legal codes, and sometimes barbarism learns to write very well. If seeing these blueprints matters to you, hit subscribe, ring the bell, because the past isn't just prologue, it's a training manual, and we need to be able to read it. We need to see the wires behind the tapestry, the cold logic behind the heat of battle. Only then can we recognize when the old machines are being rebooted. The bell on St. Thecla's has been silent for 5 centuries, but the echo of its last ring and the legal proceedings that followed still haunts our world. Remember it, because systems that forget how evil can be made legal are the most vulnerable to seeing it return. Let's delve deeper into the specific legal manuals that guided these actions. The Ottomans operated on the Hanafi school of Islamic law, which had extensive commentary on the rules of war and captives. Texts like Al-Hidayah and its commentaries spelled it out. The head of state has absolute discretion over captives. They could be killed, enslaved, ransomed, or released. But for women and children, the default was enslavement. Their persons and their honor became the property of the Muslim community, distributed as booty. The legal term for this is fay, spoils of war that belong to the state treasury. A captured nun was considered fay. She was state property to be allocated by the Sultan. This is why the process felt so bureaucratic. It wasn't personal vengeance, it was asset management. The nuns were entries in the ledger of conquest. Now consider the experience from the Ottoman soldier's perspective. He wasn't committing a sin, he was receiving his lawful share of the plunder. If he was given a nun as his portion, he was exercising a right granted by God through victory. The religious justification transformed predation into piety. This is perhaps the most psychologically disturbing aspect. Good men, devout men, could participate in this system with clean consciences. They were following the law. The system manufactured moral blindness through jurisprudence. It created a framework where the unthinkable became not just acceptable, but righteous. Let's look at another case study from the margins of Europe. In 1475, the Ottoman general Gedik Ahmed Pasha conquered the Genoese colony of Kaffa in Crimea. The Catholic monasteries there were filled with nuns of Italian, Armenian, and Greek origin. Contemporary accounts describe what happened next with clinical detachment. Those who had taken the veil were distributed among the officers according to their rank and merit. Notice the language, distributed, like medals or promotions. These women didn't just lose their freedom, they became human currency in the Ottoman reward system, a way for the Sultan to say well done to his commanders. The psychological impact on Christian Europe was seismic. The capture of nuns became a staple of anti-Ottoman propaganda, but also of genuine terror. Prints circulated showing nuns being dragged away by turbaned soldiers. Sermons thundered about the defilement of Christ's brides. This fear was a potent weapon. It mobilized crusading rhetoric for centuries, but it also created a strange, perverse fascination. The captive nun became a figure of both pity and erotic fantasy in Western art and literature. The Ottomans, perhaps unintentionally, had poisoned the well of cultural relations for generations. They had created an image of Islamic conquest that was uniquely intimate and violating. Now let's consider the geographical scope. This wasn't just a Mediterranean phenomenon. As the Ottomans pushed into Central Europe, the same patterns emerged. During the Long Turkish War, 1593-1606, convents in Hungary and Transylvania were targeted. The capture of nuns served a dual purpose, practical and symbolic. Practically, they were valuable slaves. Symbolically, they demonstrated Ottoman power over the very institutions that represented Christian resistance and piety. This practice created a desperate, tragic response. Some chronicles tell of nuns committing suicide before capture, throwing themselves from walls, taking poison. They chose physical death over legal and spiritual annihilation. Their suicide was seen as a form of martyrdom, a final act of agency against the Ottoman legal machine. But even here, the law had an opinion. In Islamic jurisprudence, suicide is a grave sin. But what about forcing someone to choose between suicide and enslavement? The system created moral dilemmas with no good answers, only varying degrees of horror. It cornered the human spirit in ways that still shock us today. Let's shift perspective to the long-term demographic impact. The systematic absorption of Christian women, especially nuns, into Ottoman society had genetic consequences. Recent genetic studies of modern Turkish populations show significant European maternal lineage. Some scholars connect this directly to the centuries of captive taking. The nuns and women like them became ancestors. Their DNA flows in millions of people today who have no knowledge of the violent, legalized transaction that brought their ancestors into the world. This is the ultimate erasure, not just of individuals, but of the memory of their violation. The conquest became biological, woven into the very fabric of a population. It also created complex identities. Consider the children, the sons of nuns and Ottoman masters. They were raised as Muslims, as Ottomans, as elites. But what whispers did they hear? What sadness did they see in their mother's eyes? What subconscious legacy of trauma did they carry? Some of these men became the empire's greatest defenders. Others may have harbored silent sympathies for their mother's lost world. We can only speculate. This brings us to the central paradox. The Ottoman system was both brutally effective and fundamentally unstable. It created loyal servants with potentially divided hearts. It built an empire on a foundation of systematic, legalized rape, then expected that foundation to produce stable, loyal generations. This is the contradiction at the heart of all slave societies. Now let's examine the response from the church. What could they do? Military resistance often failed. Diplomatic appeals were frequently ignored. So they turned to spiritual warfare. Nuns were encouraged to see themselves as potential martyrs. Their vows were reinforced with new urgency. Some orders developed secret rituals for what to do if captured, prayers to recite, ways to maintain inner faith while outwardly complying. Spiritual resistance manuals. The church also developed the theology of involuntary apostasy. If a nun was forced to convert under threat of rape or death, her conversion wasn't valid in God's eyes. This was crucial psychological armor. It told these women, God understands. Your soul remains yours, no matter what they do to your body. It was a direct counter to the Ottoman legal fiction. Where Ottoman law said, your spiritual marriage is annulled, Christian theology whispered, it is eternal. This theological battle over the nun's soul was as real as the physical battle over her body. Two legal systems, two cosmic orders clashing over a single human being. Let's look at the economic dimension. The capture of nuns wasn't just about souls or symbolism, it was business. Convents often held wealth, land, donations, liturgical objects. When nuns were captured, their property was frequently confiscated as well. The Ottoman state gained twice, a human asset and a financial one. The legal framework justified both seizures under the same principle of conquest. This created a vicious cycle. Wealthy convents became targets because they were wealthy. Their wealth made them targets. The legal system provided the cover for plunder. We see this pattern across the Ottoman frontier. The richest monasteries with the most elaborate libraries and golden altarpieces were often the first hit. The nuns were part of the loot, but so were the chalices, the manuscripts, the land deeds. Holiness had a market price, and the Ottomans were expert appraisers. Now consider the legacy in art and memory. For centuries after, Balkan and Greek iconography featured the captured nun as a symbol of national suffering. Frescoes in remote monasteries show turbaned figures dragging women in black habits. Folk songs mourn the black crows who took our sisters. This cultural memory became a form of resistance. By remembering, these communities refused the final victory the Ottomans sought: erasure. The legal process aimed to transform a nun into a slave, then a concubine, then perhaps a mother, until her original identity was gone. Cultural memory fought this transformation. Every ballad sung, every icon painted was a defiance of Ottoman legal reclassification. It said, "We remember who she was. Your paperwork cannot erase her." This brings us to perhaps the most important question. What does this mean for us today? Why dwell on such a dark, complex history? Because the Ottoman system reveals a fundamental truth about power. When power wants to do something terrible, it often dresses it in law. It doesn't say, "Let's rape these women." It says, according to Statute X, subsection Y, these captives fall under Category Z, which grants us certain property rights. The language of law becomes a solvent for morality. It allows ordinary people to participate in extraordinary evil while feeling like upright citizens. We see this pattern repeated throughout history. In the Holocaust, with its meticulous laws defining who was Jewish, in apartheid South Africa, in every system of institutionalized oppression. The paperwork is the crime. The ledger entry is the scream. The legal precedent is the knife. The Ottoman treatment of captured nuns is a perfect case study in this phenomenon. It shows us the anatomy of legalized evil in high resolution. So what became of the legal framework itself? As the Ottoman Empire modernized in the 19th century, pressure grew to reform or abandon these practices. The slave trade was gradually restricted, then abolished. International norms shifted, but the underlying legal interpretations never formally repudiated. They remain in classical texts, waiting. This is the danger of uncritical tradition. The tools of past oppression remain in the toolbox, ready for use. Modern extremist groups understand this. They mine these classical texts for justifications, presenting medieval jurisprudence as eternal, divine. They skip over centuries of context and reform to resurrect the Ottoman qadi's handbook. The blueprints for horror are preserved in amber. This forces us to confront a difficult truth about religious and legal traditions. They contain multitudes, wisdom, and compassion alongside justification for atrocities. The challenge is to separate the timeless values from the time-bound cruelties, to honor tradition while repudiating its dark chapters. For the memory of Sister Theodora and thousands like her, this work is essential. It's how we ensure their suffering wasn't completely in vain. It's how we build a world where law protects the vulnerable rather than providing cover for their violation, where sacredness is respected across battle lines. This is the unfinished business of history, not just to record what happened, but to learn its lessons so thoroughly that they can never be repeated. The Black Code exists to do this work, to analyze the programs of power, past and present, to understand how systems of control operate. The story of the captured nuns is a masterclass in such systems. It shows us the intersection of law, religion, gender, and power in its most brutal form. It reminds us that civilization is fragile, that the distance between prayer and profanity, between sanctuary and slavery, can be crossed in a morning. With the right legal framework, anything can be normalized, any horror can be made routine, any sacred vow can be unmade by a judge's decree. This is what we must guard against, not just foreign armies, but the corruption of our own systems, the twisting of law to serve power rather than justice. The bell of St. Thecla's convent is gone. The stones have been scattered, but the echo of its last ring contains a warning we cannot afford to ignore. It tells us that the greatest threats often come wearing robes, not armor, carrying law books, not swords, speaking in the calm language of precedent, not the heat of rage. This is the Black Code. If you understand why this history matters, you're already part of the resistance. Subscribe, stay vigilant, keep decoding. Because the past is never really past. It's a script waiting to be performed again. And only those who have read it can hope to rewrite the ending.